who needed to? And you got a parking sticker? And so what happens when you go out is you put in, wait, what do you put in first?
You put in the yellow or the white ticket and then the green ticket.
White ticket first, and then you put in the green ticket, and then you should be able to get out. Okay, so.
Green is the money.
Green is the money, white is the ticket. Thank you, that helps. That's a really good one. We'll remember that. Thank you, Sarah. So that's the parking thing. If you park in any other lot, you don't get the thing for it, so you have to park in that one. Lunchtime, we believe that teachers in the summer should be able to have time to eat, so we do an hour at lunch. But it really is an hour. Like, we will start an hour after, so make sure you're back then. The women who've been helping, I'll introduce in a minute, have put together a list of some local things. Because the university doesn't have as much going on in the summer, there aren't as many things open in the Student Center, but there's a Smash Burger and a Starbucks open downstairs. And there's also, and Geneva will explain to you how to get there, there's another place where for $7.90,
yes,
you can go through and get any kind of food, and it's pretty good, right?
And it's all you can eat, so I mean, yes. Yeah. It's so good.
It says Pregnant Geneva. It's all you can eat.
Priorities.
There are also some other restaurants they're really close by that are walkable. It's important that you know that if you take the car to go someplace, that ticket only validates you once. So if you go to the car and go someplace, then you're on your own to pay for parking in the afternoon. We have another room 300 at the end. I'm not quite sure why they gave us 2 rooms, but they did, which is more of a banquet room. I just saw it was locked, but we can get it unlocked. And that's someplace you can go for a break or whatever if you want that, or just walk around. There's bathrooms down that way, men's and women's bathrooms down the hall that way. There's a single unisex one here. And I think that's all of those kinds of housekeeping things. If you need sketches, Darcy's talked to you about that. All right, everybody good? So, so my goals over these days, these are the things that I've been thinking about. I really want you as a teacher, or as a teacher educator, or as somebody who works with teachers, to discover the power of your own voices and find ways to use your stories to enter the public discussion about educational issues, to help you learn organizing strategies that will show you how to move from anecdote to action, and to help you name a particular educational issue that you're passionate about, articulate a stance on that issue, and create a plan to make change. Today, I'll be doing, there'll be more instruction coming from me today than there will be on the other days, but we'll do some instruction, some introducing you to some things about advocacy. There'll be, do some, I'll talk, you'll do some stuff, I'll talk, you do some stuff. As we go through the 3 days, it'll be more and more that you're just working on your own project. And then by Thursday, you guys will be presenting your own projects. Thursday, we're delighted. We're going to have 2 guests come in. One, a woman who was in this last year, Elaine Felix, who's came up with an action plan and put it into effect in her school district, and she's going to talk about what she's done. And we also have an amazing community organizer named Andy Buxbaum, she's laughing because it's my husband, who's going to come in and talk a little bit about, how does this work in the worlds in which he lives. And so he is there to answer questions about what he does. And I think last year, Aaron is a returning fellow, but I think last year that was one of the highlights of the thing. People really, I learned a bunch of stuff I didn't know, which was great. So that's what the 3 days are going to look like. So good morning. We're just getting started, so welcome. Join us. So those are my goals. So I thought we'd do introductions this way, to go around and have people say who you are, where you teach, what drew you this workshop, and if you do, what specific issue might you want to pursue. If you don't have an issue, that's okay too. But we're thinking about issues as something that you care deeply about, and that you want to help make change with. Like, for example, last night I had the good fortune to participate in an online thing with Jennifer Bueller, who is an author of a new book about young adult literature. Her issue is young adult literature, and how can she get people to know and accept young adult literature in new ways. So you don't have to have it really specific, but if there's an area, it's reading, it's writing, it's young adult literature, it's working with immigrant students, it's whatever it is, just you can let us know what that is. And we'll go around and do that, and then I'll tell you about why I'm here, my interests. Do you want to start?
Sure. Hi, everybody. It's my first time here. So I found out about this because of this wonderful person. My name is Alona Troitsky. You remember my name like I'm all Alona, but I'm not, because I talk to everybody all the time. I teach at the junior high, 7th, 8th grade. For 13 years, I taught in alternative ed, which was shut down. I guess what they cited was lack of funds, which is a bunch of BS. But anywho, I don't know if I came up with a specific wording per se, but
Don't worry about that.
right, my advocacy is for the voiceless students that they don't fit into those tight little evaluation boxes that we have, but they have a lot to give and they have everything in the world to offer, and to make sure that they are heard, represented, and that they have a place in our public schools and not just you don't fit by. So, yep.
Great. Thank you.
Is that-
Alona.
Alona, but I'm not
Ignore
Alona.
that Y.
Yeah, well, it's pronounced for realsies, Alona.
Okay.
But let's not go there.
Okay,
That's
Alona.
a whole other story. Yep.
Okay.
I'm from Russia, so yeah, you can say it with the American accent.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Erin. I teach at Holt. I teach seniors with the senior campus, North Campus. This
In
is
Lansing, for people who don't know that.
Yes, just south of Lansing. And it's a little suburb school. And so I teach English and speech, and this is my 4th year technically, but last year I was finishing my master's, so I finished doing my project. So I came, when I was planning on coming, I was going to continue what I'd already planned to do, but I might change it now. So it's either going to be about building relationships between the staff, or it might be the racial tension. So I got to think about it. But I'm excited to be here. And if you'd like a sticker, you're welcome to. So I need to make sure I lovely woman.
Love when people go.
The story of this is she always,
Bye, day 2
wherever Erin goes, stickers are handed out.
Yeah, but I just like the
Graduate classes, workshops, her work with
I
students.
do. It makes me smile. I wanted to
Well, that way I get to know that my students have been told they are loved that day, and I get to touch them in a safe way. It's time.
Okay. David.
David Arsen, professor at Michigan State University. I'm an economist. I've been in college education for years. You might wonder what the heck am I doing here? But I've been, I work in education policy, school funding, and charter schools privatization. And usually the things I write are for policymakers and administrative level people. I have some experience doing that. I'm just looking for new ways to reach more people. And so most of that sort of higher up, in the sense that it's more grassroots. And I go to the YMCA many mornings, and there is someone there who I had conversations with for years. She said, "Why don't you come to this class?" I said, "I need to learn." So that's why I'm here. I live in Ann Arbor. So I'm just trying to figure out what my project is going to be. And I've got some ideas on to give a sense of it.
Great.
My name is Mandy Sovey. I teach at Harmoniesburg High School in Flint Township. Teach English, mostly 10th grade, but I also teach some reading intervention classes as well. I'm here. I saw you speak, Kathy, at doing a group of folks at MCTE.
Okay.
And the reason I went to that is Mitch Novus from the Red Cedar Rain Project, which I Summer Institute a few years ago. We were talking about something, and he mentioned that I should do this workshop. And so that was probably 2 years ago. And I've just kind of kept it on my radar, and so I decided to jump in this year. I'm really excited to be here. So the specific issue that I want to pursue, there are 2 areas that I've come in with, knowing that I might completely shift to something different. But I've been frustrated in the last 2 years that it seems that my building in central administration, there's no opportunities for teachers. There are very few opportunities for teachers to be leaders. And a lot of our, we don't have department chairs, and department chairs were replaced with professional learning communities, but our professional learning community staff meetings. And for 2 years, I've been quietly grumbling and grumbling in lounges, and I feel like that's one area. I'm not sure if that's something I'm going to go with, but that's something that's always present in my mind. And then the second is creating a culture of reading in the building. Or helping to create a culture of reading in the building. So those are the 2 areas that I'm interested in at this point.
And those could be connected.
Okay.
I mean, when you create that culture, you create leadership roles for teachers.
Okay.
Maybe. Let's think that.
Excellent. I'm Sarah Andrew. I'm the District Department Chair for English for Ann Arbor Public Schools. This last year was my first year not teaching, and that part of my job was really hard on me. I taught 18 years and realized last year just how absolutely much I love it. So we'll see what that means for me. I'm not sure. What drew me to this workshop obviously is Kathy. She is a dear friend and important mentor to me. But also, Dr. Arson, when I heard you were here, it kind of sealed the deal. You were going to come. I am a big fan. Your work on school funding is so important, and I appreciate it very much.
And I think you can call David. We're all colleagues here.
Yes. Thank you. I will. But truly, I am a big fan, and I appreciate the work. And I think that the policy work is really important, and policy and practice are super important, and that gets me to my point of advocacy. We have worked really, my issue is workshop and student voice and choice. And we've worked together really carefully and well, I think, in the district English department to build common assessments and testing out process and all of these things that we have to do that are really wide open, create a lot of space. We are forced to have evaluations. The state tells us how the evaluation is to look, and yet I think we've worked really hard within our department to try to crack that open and make sure that it isn't creating giant burdens for teachers. But inside of that, creating lots of space and not making mandates where we don't have to. Teachers have kept all the voice and choice to themselves. And that wasn't really the intention. Like, the intention was to share the voice and choice with students. And so there's this level of irony for me that breaks, it creates a lot of worry and creates a lot of concern around how do we make sure that we are in a safe space where we can create the right environment for students and create that classroom that's so magical and be professionals. And don't take that away from students in the same way we don't want it taken away from us. So create the spaces and help people see workshop as realistic opportunity, not just pie in the sky fantasy that's on the team.
Thank you.
I'm Melissa. I'm the coordinator of instruction for literacy at Washington ISD. So I work directly with teachers now in this role. What drew me to the workshop, I'm thinking of when I was in the Theater Writing Project in 2006. Mitch was my small group writing group leader. And that took me to an NCTE conference where I found your book, Teachers Organizing for Change. So I read it when I was teaching 8th grade English in East Rapids. So that's how I first knew Kathy, through the book and through your work in English. And then when I came here to Ann Arbor 4.5 years ago, I really wanted to connect with the universities near us and connect with researchers to work with teachers and empower teachers. And that's why Kathy and I started working together on teacher research. So Kathy has worked with my early literacy group for the last 3 years on teaching teachers how to be researchers themselves. So that's somewhere around that specific issue, how we use teacher research to be advocates for teaching. Because I see what happens when they really do buy in and really do their own research, and I see how others look at them when they present their research and think, wow, you're a researcher too. the whole difference between the big R and little r, and research is for everyone. So I definitely want to see that connected in this work for me these 3 days. And also just, I'm tired of watching teachers leave the classroom because they don't really have any other choice. I'm actually afraid for the profession too, so I think this work is really important for that.
My name is Jan Heyer, and I apologize for being late. I was thinking as I was coming in, maybe I'll learn some advocacy tips to deal with Siri. Siri and I had a few conversations this morning, and all she could say was, return to the root, return to the root. And the root was blocked. It was a pile of concrete in the middle of it. So I apologize for being late. I am from the Chippewa River Writing Project. I'm on the leadership team, so that's up at Central Michigan University. I teach in Cadillac, which is, if you hold up your map of Michigan, it's up here. So from a ways away. Luckily, my dad still lives in Plymouth. I grew up in this area, grew up in Farmington Hills, and went to the University of Michigan, so I'm familiar with the area, except for the detours this morning, which were. But I think, like everybody else, I'm hearing the same kinds of things that I'm interested in. I just finished up my 26th year in education, and I am concerned for the profession as a whole. I'm concerned for the enrollment. I know Central's enrollment in their teacher education program has dropped off considerably, as it has in other universities. And my personal issue right now is evaluation. We have undertaken an evaluation system, and now all of our PD is about compliance with that system. There's no more PD. That's what I keep telling people. I haven't had PD now in 2 years because I do not count Marzano's approaches as PD. They're just simply compliance techniques that I have to do. So that's my big bee in my bonnet right now is I would like to talk back to this notion of all PD being around compliance and evaluation. I don't think it's right for kids. Our kids are very aware of the evaluation process. This process makes them rate themselves every day on a 4-3-2-1, which I refuse to do. And so I can't remember the phrase in the article that we read from you, Kathy, about advocacy that's safe, savvy, and there was a third.
Smart.
Yes.
And we're adding a fourth today.
Okay, excellent. That is
just a little preview.
Yeah.
My brain keeps thinking.
Yeah, that is what I'm looking for. I want to push back. I pushed back on the legislative stuff. I was our EA president for several years, and now I want to push back more at the local level on a system that I think is hurting kids and prohibiting teachers from entering the profession and sending people out. We had a huge number of people leave the district this year because they're fed up. So.
Thank you.
My name is Ron Harris. I am an English teacher in Los Angeles, California. I teach at a school called Valley Academy of Arts and Sciences. At our school, we are attempting to integrate the arts into our everyday instruction, using art to reach all of our different goals in our classes and all the different genres that we're looking at. And so we try to do project-based learning at our school. And I love our school. It's a great school. We have a lot of really, really great teachers there. What drew me to the workshop is that I'm turning 60 this year, and I've been teaching for 22 years, and so I know I'm on the back end of things, and it's easy to just go. It's easy to give up. It's easy to go, I'm done with this, or I'll just cruise until the end. And but then there's another part of me that says, no, don't do that. So I've been drawn to this because I don't want to give up. I want to keep advocating for things and accomplishing things in education. There's so many bright people, so many intelligent people, so many concerned people in instruction. This room is full of them, and I don't understand how we got to where we're at with so many people who know we're going the wrong way. Anyway, my issue, I was walking my dogs with my wife, and I said, because I was thinking about, I teach with Darcy over here, and she has an issue, and I like her issue, and I may go with her issue.
She's got so many issues.
So many. But that's another story.
But I asked my wife, I said, what is it that I really get irritated by? And she said, well, you hate grade robots. And that's my term for students who are not in it for the education, they're in it for the grade. And there's a whole set of students. I teach a lot of the AP classes, so I get those kids that all they're about is the competition to get the highest grade possible. And they really don't care about what they're learning. So I'm like tempted to do like a piercing dig and not give them any grades all year and make them crazy and see what happens.
Please don't.
I actually may well do that at some point. But I'm frustrated by kids and it's not their fault. It's really not their fault. But we have. I'm also frustrated by the fact that we have huge amounts of research that tell us that giving grades and making that the center of things ruins education. There's immense research on that, and it's all on that side, and yet we continue to do it. I don't know whether it's, and we do the same to our teachers now. It's all about evaluation, and I don't understand that we know these things are true, and yet we still do them. That's the kind of thought that makes me want to give up, because I completely don't understand that. It's so entirely illogical. So I know that's a windmill I'm tilting at. I know that there's very little chance that the world will change in that way. Because for me, that's why I was a C student in high school and a straight A student in college, because it became about what I was learning in college and not about the grades, which I rebelled against. And so, if I could change something, if I could advocate for something, that's what I would advocate.
Thanks, Ron.
I'm Jan Spoor. I teach 6th grade English, history, and drama in Los Angeles, more specifically Woodland Hills, California. I was getting my master's degree this last year, and Kathy, our leader, not your leader, but our leader, at the CSUN Writing Project, was one of my professors for my master's cohort, and she had us write an article for a magazine to submit for publication. And my article was on teaching students how to navigate fake news, and which I didn't really like writing the article, but because of that, she said, "Oh, there's a thing, and you should do this thing, and you're going to go to Michigan." And so I said, "Oh, okay." And I think that she thought that my whole thing would be about fake news, but it's not, because I don't really. It's been there, done that. But I'm a huge believer in Common Core standards because I know them to work. I'm a huge believer in writing in the classroom and in teaching non-readers to love reading again. Not last year, the year before that, I wrote a proposal at my school to create an academy for the visual and performing arts and make that academy a span school, meaning going from 6th grade to 12th grade. And before, when I thought it was still just a rough draft, it had already been through our school district and been on everyone's desk and had a $55 million bond attached to it to build a high school for
this little program I wrote. So we started this last year with our Visual Performing Arts Academy, and it sort of incorporates everything I learned in our writing project, where we have 5 art strands, writing being one of them. We have arts integration and project-based learning in the classroom. And again, I know it to work. I know that it reaches kids on a different level and makes them feel confident and good. And so I think my advocacy is going to be based on keeping arts in the schools. It's always the first thing that gets cut. And it's frustrating on a really big level. I don't know that I would have gone to college if it wasn't for the arts. So I did not have a great GPA. But I did have a full ride scholarship. So I think that it's another avenue to learning that gets shut down. Or there's also a STEAM academy at our school whose teachers think that it's really fun to talk about the VAPA Academy, that's our academy, being the teachers that just play with Play-Doh all day, because that's what I do. I play with Play-Doh. I don't teach. And not that standardized tests are the end-all be-all, but my test scores were on point, so I don't really see that as a thing. So I think that's going to be my focus, is keeping the arts in the schools.
Great. Thank you.
Darcy McGrath. I also am in Los Angeles with Ron down the way at Valley Academy of Arts and Sciences. I teach 9th and 10th grade English, and I also teach speech. This year it's speech through the film lens, because we need a film class, and I have an English credential. So I'll be teaching kind of a hybrid of speech favoring the film side. And I'm also launching a new writing seminar this year I'm really excited about, and it's what's going to be kind of what we're launching off of. I read an article in Medium about an individual, a non-educator, who feels that kids need a social media class. Teenagers need a social media class, and it's not about how to take a really good selfie. It's about how to be consumers as well as marketers of their brand as teens. And I come to teaching as a second career, well, third, if you talk launching 2 children into the world as a career. So this, I've only been teaching 10 years, so this is a second career for me. And I know what it looks like in the private sector to hire people. And the first thing my husband does is Googles their name. Well, he doesn't, HR, Googles their name. And where does it come up? And what are they posting? And what does it look like? And how are they branding themselves? And how many red cups do they have in their hands? And how many inappropriate posts? And how many athletes have lost their full ride scholarships because they posted a racial tweet? I know what to say. Tweet. Well, because I was going to actually show you. I was going 2 different ways with that thought, and it just became something else. But the fact that our kids need to be consumers. So then I go to there, and it's like, how are you going to advocate for social media? By giving them technology, by allowing them to have technology and not putting a muzzle on it, and not saying you are not mature enough to decide what you consume. My biggest tagline is, we're raising 21st century children. We need to give them 21st century tools. Like, we can't deny that. While yes, I'm also a proponent of project-based learning, and I do a lot of it in my classroom, and our kids do, I'm like, it's origami day, and we do foldables, and we do all those other wonderful tactile and beautiful things, but then they take a, what I call food blogger picture of it and submit it to a learning platform for me to apply a rubric to. So there's got to be a melding of it, and we've got to bring technology to the very far reaches of where we're at. So, and what does it look like, and how do they consume it, and how do they become appropriate uses of it? So I'm wondering what that looks like. So the umbrella would be technology, but the spokes of that umbrella would be how to become consumers as well as presenters of it. So.
Hi, I'm Geneva. I teach 10th and 11th grade English at Carlson High School in Gibraltar, so I'm like just North Monroe down that way. So I'm here because Kathy allowed me to work for her in exchange for admission, so that I thought it was a perfect trade. So thank you. And so Kathy's also my master's project director. So any more Kathy time, I'm okay with. Oh, please, you're good. So I'm always feeling angsty about something because I'm antagonistic when it comes to things. So, but shockingly, I'm actually thinking about how I can incorporate what I learn here into my curriculum so I can teach my students how to advocate for something that they want. So I'm very happy in the direction that my department decided to go in, because we were really old school where it's just like, we will only write literary analysis, we will only do literary analysis. You laugh and it's just sad. I feel like I was just like, oh my god, I can't believe we're doing this. I know. So what's been really cool is that we got the department to read Book Love by Penny Kittle, and everyone's like, wow, like there's benefiting to the students when we read different kinds of books, and like, look, we can do different kinds of things. Yeah. So like, it was really exciting to see light bulbs go off with like our relatively young staff, because like we could do this for a long time. So then the other thing is, you know, I want them to also think about writing, like what are some other ways that we can have our kids write, because they're still stuck on, cool, we can do all these things, but literary analysis, no. So I'm trying to think about how can I expand my department's definition of what writing is, and how can they learn to be uncomfortable with and be okay with that, like there are other kinds of writing that you don't have to have mastered to be a teacher of writing, and then how can you use like mentor text. So just, I don't know, expanding their views, and then going back to like the advocacy thing, we teach To Kill a Mockingbird, and I think it would be a great platform for students to see, like, okay, well, how, you know, we talk about author's purpose. What is Harper Lee's purpose in writing To Kill a Mockingbird? Like, what is she really advocating for here? And so then how can you then advocate through different kinds of writing? So I think that might be a good project for like my students to model for my department, because I'm finding that I'm having some success with like, hey kids, we're going to try this, and I want to bring it back to the department, and then I want them to see what you can do based on what you've learned. And that seems to have been working so far, so I'll keep using that if it still works.
Thanks, Geneva. We have two people who are coming late, so when they come, we'll introduce them. One person who is a no-show, so we'll see what that is. Darcy has newly been helping us, and I think it's going to stay today, right?
Yeah.
Do you want to just introduce yourself and who you are, what you're doing?
I'm Darcy Reese. I'm a graduate student here at Eastern Michigan University. I teach in the first year writing program, so I'm 1 year, so I'll start my second year in the fall. I'm here because I was helping Geneva and learning the job, because she's moving on to bigger and brighter things, and I'll be kind of trying to fill her big shoes next year. I don't get up in arms about things very usually. It's not my personality, but I'm excited to see you all and hear you talk about this, and I hope that maybe I'll recognize something that I do feel strongly about and want to advocate for. So
Great. Thanks for this, Darcy. So this is part of our Eastern Michigan Writing Project site, and Geneva's been, in addition to teaching full-time, has been the graduate assistant with a toddler at home and now pregnant. And now Darcy is going into that role without all of those other things. Graduate student full-time. Yeah. Okay, so thank you. I had goosebumps at some of the things you guys were saying. It's so powerful to have teachers just talk about these issues and what are the issues. And we don't get enough chance to do that, right, as teachers, I don't think. I want to share with you where I am and why I've become involved in this. So I started as a high school teacher many years ago, in which I thought teachers were being treated badly then, and that was nothing compared to now. But I was always concerned about this happening or this happening or this happening. I went on to go to the University of Michigan, where I got a PhD in English education. Did a lot of my PhD work in Saginaw, Michigan, working with kids, all different kinds of kids and all different kinds of teachers. And then came here to Eastern, and I've been here at Eastern for my whole career, working in English education and in the teaching of writing. But in terms of advocacy, so I'm married to somebody who, he works in the environmental field, but has spent his early life working for Ralph Nader, and has been like a sort of community advocate for his whole life, and knows a lot more about it than I do. And so for many years, I would come home and complain about things that were happening in education, and he would say, well, you know what you should do? And he'd go like, blah, 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 blah. And I'd be like, yeah, whatever, honey. That sounds good, but I'm not an organizer. What can I do? Like, I don't know how to do this stuff. And so after years of hearing him say that, I decided, maybe I could learn something about this. And I started doing research into what does it mean to be an organizer, what does it mean to be an advocate. And the book that somebody mentioned, Melissa mentioned, Teachers Organizing for Change, is something I wrote a long time ago, in which I worked with a bunch of teachers who I realized were doing a lot of the kinds of things that organizers and advocates do. So I was really inspired by that, and so I did case studies of a bunch of other people in different fields, like people who are in environmental work, people who are working in poverty situations, people who are named as advocates in those worlds, and tried to learn from them. So I wrote a book about that, and then this sort of became a part of my teaching, to try to have teachers think about how they really are advocates. And we advocate for our students all the time, right? So we have some of those natural inclinations. And so how can we do that? Well, then a bunch of stuff happened in the world, and the situation for teachers has gotten even worse, and we'll talk about that in a couple minutes. And so I've been thinking a lot about this, sort of in this new era, what does this mean? And I was going to write another book about it, like sort of update that one, and then decided I didn't really want to write another book that like 100 people buy. It just doesn't seem like it doesn't seem like advocacy. It's not getting it out to the audience who needs to do it, right? So I turned down a book contract and decided instead to do this website that you guys some of you have looked at, the everydayadvocacy.org, to try to take the knowledge that I had and this work that I've been doing over summers with teachers and put it out there. So that's what I decided to do instead. And so we've been calling it Everyday Advocacy, with this idea of how you can do it as part of your life as a teacher. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So that's who I am. That's why I'm here. My whole advocacy thing is I want teachers' voices to be out there to change the world. So thank you for all this. Let me talk a little bit about some of these things. I'm going to start with a couple of quotes to get us inspired. One of my heroes, I know this is one of David's heroes too, Grace Lee Boggs, a Detroit person who died about a year ago, 2 years ago, at age 100, I think. And she says this: just being angry, just being resentful, just being outraged does not constitute revolution. And to me, that's a battle cry, right? We spend a lot of time being angry. We spend a lot of time being upset at the things that are going on, but that's not enough, right? I was also reminded, do we have Hamilton fans here? There's a line in one of the songs where he's talking about this is a moment for revolution, and then he says, scratch that. It's a movement, not a moment. And that is sort of what I'm thinking too. It's got to be more than just this moment of outrage. I was recently at an environmental conference with my husband, and this guy didn't speak, but somebody quoted him, and he said this: optimism is a political act. Those who benefit from the status quo are perfectly happy for us to think nothing is going to get any better. In fact, these days, cynicism is obedience. And he said that in terms of environmental movement, but it really struck me, that notion of optimism is a political act, right? I mean, I think about what Ron just said. He's feels like he's at the end of his career in some ways, but he doesn't want to just go down that route of being pessimistic, of being that, what can I do? And I think these are the kinds of things we've got to get teachers to start thinking about. Let's not, or anybody who wants to make change, it's not enough to make change to just say, this stinks, this stinks, this stinks, this stinks, I'm mad about it. We got to think about, what is it that we can do that makes it a movement, not a moment, right? What can we do in that way? And how can we work from optimism that we can get things done? I know I sound naive, but I don't think I am. I mean, I think this is the change that we have to have happen. Again, I will put all of this up on our website at the end of the day. Okay, so why do I care about this so much? So you guys have all heard these, right? Teachers don't work so hard. Your days, you get done by 3, and, you've got these long vacations. If you're at the college level, you hear that too. You only teach like 2 or 3 classes. Or if you're at a research university, you only teach 1 class. What are you complaining about? There's this one you hear, teachers only care about some students, which was sort of originally what lay behind No Child Left Behind legislation, Race to the Top, because we got to make sure teachers care about all students, because teachers don't care about us. We only care about certain students. We hear this. Teachers don't know what works best in their own classroom, right? That's why originally, right, we have a nationalized curriculum or state curriculum because we have to help teachers know what to teach. Teachers don't know how to assess students accurately, right? That's what leads to things like, nationalized testing, state testing. We can't trust teachers to evaluate what's going on in the schools. We have to have these other kinds of things. I just read an article yesterday that was in the Washington Post. I don't know how many of you saw it. It's called 7 Things Teachers Are Tired of Hearing from School Reformers, right? And these were kind of on it, and there were some other things too. I urge you to look it up because it's just like, yeah. And so, who forwards this story? It's forwarded all over the place. So media forwards it, right? You see these sensationalist headlines. You see these stories in the media. They see the reports that come out of the media that put a little frame about who teachers are and what teachers don't do. Entertainment. We see those bad teacher movies, right? You see all those kinds of things.
Every movie about teachers is awful.
Yeah. I mean, they're interesting in particular ways. Like, a lot of those are, all teachers are bad, but the one teacher who works 20 million hours a day can rise above and save students, right? So that becomes, like, those are exceptional teachers, and most teachers aren't that. They further that, right? I haven't seen this because I haven't had enough stamina to do this, but apparently this new PBS show that really talked about Betsy DeVos and charter schools in real positive ways, it was PBS, and people have gone crazy about it. Diane Ravitch had a column about it yesterday or the day before to look up. I just can't bring myself to watch it yet. I know I have to. Haven't done it yet. But it continues to go on. Regulators and government officials, Betsy DeVos. Okay. Philanthropic foundations. This is a new thing in the world, right? That philanthropic organizations have been giving as much money as they've been giving with agendas in mind. Like, it used to be that they gave lots of money, but now they give lots of money and they say, and I'll give you money if you do it this way. And the Gates Foundation is a perfect example of it. I love this quote that came from them after a few years of doing it. They said, unfortunately, our foundation underestimated the level of resources and support required for our public educations to be well equipped to implement standards. We missed an early opportunity to sufficiently engage educators, particularly teachers, but also parents and communities, so that benefits of the standards could take flight from the beginning. This has been a challenging lesson for us to absorb, but we take it to heart. The mission of improving education in America is both vast and complicated, and the Gates Foundation doesn't have all the answers. Love that quote, right? This is after they poured lots of money in and told teachers what they should be doing. Policy institutes that set agendas about public education. Achieve Inc. is one you guys know about, I'm sure. Lobbying groups, ALEC, the American Legislative Environmental Council? No, not, Economic Something Council. ALEC. I can't remember what the E is. But, they write model legislation and then pass it to the state. So when you start wondering about why something happening in California is the same as Michigan, is the same as Ohio, is the same as Indiana, because they write this model legislation and give it. So all of these groups kind of work together to create a story about education. So when we were saying, like, where did this come from? It's been a pretty sustained kind of movement from all these different kinds of groups. But so then when you start breaking it down, in that article that I mentioned that was in the Washington Post that said the 7 things we hate to reformers, talked about this kind of stuff too. When you start breaking down, the stories don't hold, right? So, one way is this. Too often the research basis for the claims are problematic. They're not always evidence-based. And sometimes they're really self-referential and self-serving. So this quote, I think, is an important one. And this came from Randy Bomer when the National Council of Teachers wrote a response to an early draft of the Common Core. And he said this: none of the evidence has been drawn from peer-reviewed research journals or similar sources, which those of us, in the world of research would say it has to come from peer review, right, for it to count. Rather, the evidence offered at present consists of surveys conducted by the testing companies that stand most immediately to gain from the testing of the standards, right? So if you find research that the testing companies did, who are going to make money on doing this, right, there's a problem with that as being a good research claim, as we would teach our students, right? Too often the story is interpreted through particular lenses. So this is, after there were all these, well, there as always is, but fairly recently, there were concerns about the performance of U.S. students on international tests. We don't do as well, blah, blah, blah. And Carnine Rothstein said this, that they're oversimplified, frequently exaggerated, and misleading. They ignore the complexity of test results and may lead policymakers to pursue inappropriate and even harmful reforms. Yeah, because what they were doing is if you then read these tests through a lens of poverty, through a lens of racial inequity, or if you read it through many lenses, you got different results. So the lens that you read something through really impacts that kind of stuff too. And the last thing I wanted to say, and I heard this echoed in a few things that you guys were saying, too often the story of education reflects a particular way of thinking, and this comes from Alfie Kohn. He says that there's a certain ideology along with a set of assumptions that underlies most conversations about education. Most of it actually happens in schools and most proposals for change. And these assumptions are accepted by the overwhelming majority of politicians, business leaders, journalists, I'd add, regular community members, parents, people. And so he says this, if the primary objective of schools is to transmit to children the knowledge and skills to compete in the global economy, or if that's the primary objective, it has two premises, that education should be understood primarily in economic terms, and as with test results, the goal is not to succeed, but to triumph over others. That's shades of what Ron was saying, too, about it's not the kids' fault. Like, this world has been created, and that's what education is. And if you look at some history of education, it's really interesting to see at different times and places the purpose of education has been other than that. So this is what we're up against, right? There is a huge narrative out there. There's a huge story out there that sets up what education is in a particular way, which leaves out teachers, which leaves out teacher voices, which leaves out the real stories of what's happening in school. What I want to say, and I think which all of you guys believe too, is that there are stories of teachers out there, and I have several here that I'm just going to mention a little bit about, and when you get this, they're all linked on this, but some of you may know about the Garfield teachers who some years ago refused to give the standardized tests. This is in the state of Washington. They just said we're not giving them. And so what happened there was a very interesting story of what happened there, which you can read about, but they ended up being supported by their communities because they had really done some good advocacy work to help communities support them. They still have, I saw this the other day, they still have a Facebook page called Solidarity with Garfield High School Testing Boycott. So that's a really interesting thing that came from grassroots that teachers have done. Center County teachers are an interesting group of teachers that come out of a writing project in Pennsylvania near Penn State, and they have gotten their local newspaper to publish a regular column from the teachers. So the teachers get together and write as a group of teachers and publish things. And it's a small town thing, right? But it's cool. So they write in a small town thing, like just to educate, like here's what it looks like to do reading in the classroom, right? And they do that pretty regularly. There's a beautiful blog called Writers Who Care. It's actually called Writers, Professors, and Parents Who Care. It's a longer title. But they really started doing a lot. They're writing things that are in very understandable terms from a lot of, so that parents can understand, so that teachers can understand, so that community members can understand. And the blog is out there. So if you write for this blog, it's a peer-reviewed blog, which you would all be invited to write for. It could be something that comes out of this for you. But it's peer-reviewed, and the language has to be language that really speaks to teachers, or really speaks to parents, really is understandable to people. Rick Joseph, who was last year's Michigan Teacher of the Year, took this workshop the summer before he did it because he wanted to figure out how to hone his message and do this work. He did beautiful blogs and beautiful talks around the country. I mean, he did a lot of really cool stuff to be able to get the message of the things he cared about out there. He did a lot with LGBT. He did a lot with students who are underserved. But it's another example of a teacher doing this. I threw out this in. Peter Smagorinsky, who is an English educator at the University of Georgia, he has made an agreement and gotten a column in the Atlanta newspaper, and he writes a lot about. He has a Good Teacher series that talks about portraits of good teachers and what they're doing in schools, right? So I could go on, like there could be 30 of these, 40, 50, but this is cool, like that there's some that are really, people are doing some of this work. So how do we begin to change this? Here's what I say. We have to go public with our own stories. We have to find a frame with which to tell our stories, and we're going to be talking about framing this afternoon. And we have to learn strategic ways to change others' thinking. It's not just enough to tell a story. Telling a story is good, but it's the beginning. It's not the end. So we need to figure out how to do all of that, and that's what you're going to be learning over the time here. I'll take you to this. This is the website that I was talking about, Become an Everyday Advocate, changing the narrative, and there's lots of fun stuff there that we can also look at over these few days. So who do we are, everyday advocates? I want to say it's these teachers like us who are committed to changing the public narrative surrounding education, beginning in our local contexts, right? To me, this is the biggest thing I've learned from organizers. Start local. When you start local, and you have lots of other people starting local, you can really start to make change. All these kind of local things and people talking to each other about these kinds of things that we're doing help us make change. And I think that's a really important thing because I think many of us feel frustrated sometimes. Like if you're like me, I've gotten so many calls over my social media stuff saying, write this congressman, march in this thing, do this, do that. And that's all good, right? But it's not enough. Sometimes it leads to we feel, okay, I did it. I wrote to my congressman, done. That's not enough, right? We can do a lot as teachers in an everyday way by influencing what's going on in our local settings. And if teachers are doing that all over, we stand a chance of changing the conversation. So that, we're working together, we're finding a way to make this part of our everyday lives. And that's the hard part. How do you make it a part of your everyday lives? How does it become something that is not like, oh, geez, here's another add-on, but rather becomes part of it. So that's what we're going to talk some about. And so this is why I think it's important. I think we're in a time where there's a new vision of what it means to be a professional as a teacher. Like when I started teaching, what was enough was I knew what and how to teach. I went in my classroom, I taught, I shut the door. I knew my stuff, I could do it, right? That was the way it used to be. And then I think it moved to the second stage where we've been articulating to ourselves and our colleagues why we teach in certain ways. And that, I think, has a lot to do with the kinds of I'm blanking on the name, what do you call them, the groups in schools? PLCs, yeah. You know, a lot of this is PLCs, right? We would be articulating to ourselves and our colleagues why we teach in certain ways. PLCs at their best, I think we're doing that kind of stuff. PLCs were not always at their best, but I think that at its best. I think as we move forward, what we need to be doing is strategically inform others about why we teach in these ways. We need to be ready to be able to speak to others in the world about why we're doing this. They need to understand why we're doing it. And those others include parents, and those others include community members, and those others include family. I mean, all of that. And there are really ways to do that I'm sure some of you have already done. But, you know, how can we think about doing this in a sustained way to really make change rather than a one shot here, one shot there? I believe this really strongly. And as an English educator, I think we need to train all new teachers in this. I think we need to help teachers who are already there think about how to do this. I think every teacher needs to rethink professionalism that uses this in some way. So, you mentioned the article about, I said there was a fourth S, right? So, as everyday advocates, teachers work in ways that I think are all of these. We work in ways that are smart. Like you really have to know your issue, right? You have to be able to know that issue so that you can explain to others. You can't be like, I think I heard some research once that said that, you know, that's not enough. You need to know your issue really well. You need to know what others think about the issue, right? You need to know how other people are thinking about it so you can figure out how to respond to them. And you need to then frame the issue in a new way. And again, we're going to talk about framing this afternoon. So teachers as advocates, need to work in smart ways. They need to work in safe ways because you don't want to be fired because of what you're doing. Or you also don't want to be that teacher that everybody runs away from, right? When you walk down the hall, they're like, oh God, here comes Kathy again, right? You don't want that. So when we think about working in safe ways, we're thinking about how do we develop allies? You know, how do we find people that can work with us? We think about how to build awareness, sort of general awareness about different issues. We need to work in savvy ways. So it's not just that we're concerned, but we're finding action. We're finding strategic action. And we're moving beyond that tactics-only approach I just talked about, like I'm going to call my congressman, I'm going to tweet, I'm going to do this. How do we do more than just tactics? And then our fourth S, how do we make this sustainable? How does this become a part of our everyday life? I love the word sustainable because I think it comes from like environmental world, right? And so how do we think about doing this as a sustainable thing so we don't burn out after, I've done it for 2 weeks, I'm done, right? How do we make it? How do you figure out how to do small steps that will lead to bigger steps? So we're going to keep that as a backdrop of everything we're doing. How to be smart, safe, savvy, and sustainable in this work. But then we're also going to learn about these 3 core ideas that are all on the website too, but these are the 3 core ideas that have influenced my work and my thinking about this. And the first idea is this idea of storytelling as advocacy, which is what we're going to work with this morning. We're going to talk about identifying and framing an issue. We're going to work on that this afternoon. And then tomorrow we'll really start to get into taking action and what that means. Okay, we ready to start storytelling? This man is one of my gods, right? You guys have those, right? Like you have intellectual gods that it's like, oh my, this person. Marshall Gantz is one of mine. So Marshall Gantz is at Harvard now. His story is so fascinating. I won't get into a lot of it, but he's been a community organizer for decades and decades and decades. And he did work with Cesar Chavez, like older people in the room might know me when I say that, with the California grape growers. Yeah, Californians know him. The California grape. So he worked with Cesar Chavez for a long time. He was very active in the the first Obama run for presidency. He's done a lot with grassroots advocacy. He's also super interesting because he's a very religious Jew, and so he brings a lot of stuff from Judaism into it. I just find his reading fascinating and exciting, and so he's really talked about what does it mean to tell stories? And there's one. There's so many quotes, but I pulled this one. Storytelling is how we interact with each other about values, how we share experiences with each other, counsel each other, comfort each other, and inspire each other to action. And if you think about when you're in social situations and when you tell stories, right? A lot of those things are true. That's why we tell stories. Most of us are English teachers, right? That's why we like stories, right? That's why we're drawn to stories, all this importance of stories. So I just want to do a side note about Gantz. One of the fun things I did this year is I did this online training that was run by graduate students at Harvard. It was called Resistance School, and it was a 4-session series where they brought in really interesting organizers, and they had readings you could do, and then they had an hour-and-a-half lecture, and then people asked questions, and Gantz was one of them. And so I was just tied to my computer listening to him speak. I was so excited. Anyway, so his stuff is really interesting, and he's helped me think a lot about storytelling, which teachers are good at, and which English teachers are particularly good at, and how we can use those to get us someplace in advocacy. So he talks about 3 parts of it. He says that we start with the story of self, and that's about who I am, what are my values, what are my experiences, why I do what I do, right? How your own stories really are the story of yourself. And then he talks about the second level, the story of us. When we share our stories with other people, it communicates who we are as a group. Because I share a story with Geneva, and we're talking about it, and we're talking back and forth, and we're finding common ground, right? That's how stories work. Think about when you're at parties or, when you're with families. And as you tell those stories, oh, when you say that reminds me of this, and here's my story. But what you're really doing is finding these shared values and shared experiences so you can find a way to talk. And then he talks about the third level for him is the story of now. How do we he calls it transforming the present into a time of challenge and hope. How do we take those stories and do something with them? So here's my adaptation thinking about teachers. My story as teachers, stories I have as a teacher help me think about who I am as a teacher, right? What are my values? What's my experience? Why I do what I do? Think about the stories you guys told as you started today, right? You were telling stories of yourself as teachers. And I bet if we went around right now and named the values that we heard a lot of shared values. We heard some values coming from the individual people. And then the story of us, the collective experience. We could probably, and we're going to do this in a couple minutes, but we could probably already start to name some of the values of this community, right? That's a part of what we do when we share these stories of teachers. It's what we do when we hang out with other teachers who are like-minded, right? We love hanging out with other teachers who are like-minded so we can share these stories about why we do it in this way. And then we need to think about the story of now. Who can we be if we use these stories to move us forward? How can we contribute to making change through issues and action steps? And we're going to do some of that in a minute. So I want to start us out by listening. We'll listen to this and then we'll take a break because I know it's like 10:15, so people want to take a break. But I want to start by listening to President Obama's nominating speech of John Kerry. Okay, like don't get that sad look. Sadness. Because it's still going to be inspiring. It's going to be, right, we're going to go with that. The optimism. But as you listen to it, what I want you to do is to think about the story of self, how he uses the story of self, the story of us, and the story of now. Think about how he does that. And I use this because Marshall Gant says to do this. He does this as a training thing for people to think about it. Now, we're going to hope the speakers work today, right? There was a whole thing yesterday.
Did we ever test them?
I tested them yesterday. And we're going to hope they work. I had them out of my office and suddenly
In 2004, then Illinois Senate candidate Barack Obama
Oops.
keynote address at the Democratic National Convention in Boston. He spoke about his personal background and about the Democratic
We're only going to
Party.
listen to like 8 minutes
Here is
of it.
that speech in its entirety.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Doesn't he look young?
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Dick Durbin. You make us all proud. On behalf of the great state of Illinois, crossroads of a nation, land of Lincoln, let me express my deepest gratitude for the privilege of addressing this convention. Tonight is a particular honor for me because, let's face it, my presence on this stage is pretty unlikely. My father was a foreign student, born and raised in a small village in Kenya. He grew up herding goats, went to school in a tin roof shack. His father, my grandfather, was a cook, a domestic servant to the British. But my grandfather had larger dreams for his son. Through hard work and perseverance, my father got a scholarship to study in a magical place, America, that shone as a beacon of freedom and opportunity to so many who had come before. While studying here, my father met my mother. She was born in a town on the other side of the world, in Kansas. Her father worked on oil rigs and farms through most of the Depression. The day after Pearl Harbor, my grandfather signed up for duty, joined Patton's army, marched across Europe. Back home, my grandmother raised a baby and went to work on a bomber assembly line. After the war, they studied on the GI Bill, bought a house through FHA, and later moved west, all the way to Hawaii in search of opportunity. And they too had big dreams for their daughter. A common dream born of two continents. My parents shared not only an improbable love, they shared an abiding faith in the possibilities of this nation. They would give me an African name, Barak, or Blessing, believing that in a tolerant America, your name is no barrier to success. They imagined me going to the best schools in the land, even though they weren't rich, because in a generous America, you don't have to be rich to achieve your potential. away now. And yet I know that on this night, they look down on me with great pride. They stand here, and I stand here today, grateful for the diversity of my heritage, aware that my parents' dreams live on in my two precious daughters. I stand here knowing that my story is part of the larger American story, that I owe a debt to all of those who came before me, and that in no other country on earth is my story even possible. Tonight, we gather to affirm the greatness of our nation. Not because of the height of our skyscrapers, or the power of our military, or the size of our economy. Our pride is based on a very simple premise, summed up in a declaration made over 200 years ago. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is the true genius of America. A faith in simple dreams, an insistence on small miracles, that we can tuck in our children at night and know that they are fed and clothed and safe from harm. That we can say what we think, write what we think without hearing a sudden knock on the door. That we can have an idea and start our own business without paying a bribe. That we can participate in the political process without fear of retribution, and that our votes will be counted, at least most of the time. This year, in this election, we are called to reaffirm our values and our commitments, to hold them against a hard reality, and see how we're measuring up to the legacy of our forebears and the promise of future generations. And fellow Americans, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, I say to you tonight, we have more work to do. More work to do for the workers I met in Galesburg, Illinois, who are losing their union jobs at the Maytag plant that's moving to Mexico, and now are having to compete with their own children for jobs that pay $7 an hour. More to do for the father that I met who was losing his job and choking back the tears, wondering how he would pay $4,500 a month for the drugs his son needs without the health benefits that he counted on.
I'm going to pause, because I think you get the idea.
And thousands.
How does he use the story of self, the story of us, the story of now in that speech?
So he starts with his parents' story. That seems like story of self, right?
Yeah.
Where he came from, starting with his parents' roots.
Yep. Good. What else do you see?
Sorry, go ahead. No.
I want to say, when he's doing that with the story of his parents, he starts to talk about the American dream, but maybe not like labeling it at first. Like,
Yeah.
you know, they believed in opportunity, which like we would say is what the American
Starting
dream.
to name the values, right?
Yeah.
The story of the actual story of what happened, and he starts to name the values within that. Yeah.
And the social programs that helped his family.
Yeah. Yep.
Which then the people in the audience can say that helped my family, or
Right.
that helped a neighbor, or somebody
Right.
in my community.
Right. Right. You're starting to see that movement then from here's this one person's story, but you're starting to recognize it as you're listening, and so he's then he starts to go, he says that line, my story is a story of many Americans, right? And then other people are like, yeah, my story too. So we're starting to look at those shared values surrounding it.
I think he ties it really nicely, and I noticed it this time out of the 4 times I've watched it, that he starts with a story. I mean, he starts with a story of, most specifically of himself, he starts with that, but he kind of starts with the story of us, too, by saying, I'm improbable. And
Yes.
America's the land of opportunity.
Yes.
So that, he didn't say it, but that tied me in this time. I'm like, oh my gosh, miracles like that can happen in America.
Yeah, yeah.
And then, then he goes on and ties it into the story of us, but then when he's the story of now, that dream is in jeopardy.
That dream is in jeopardy, and we need to do something, Democrats, Republicans. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's sort of a masterful thing of like how you can take a story, identify the values in it, and go. And as you all know, I'm sure that this is a thing that sort of catapulted him to national recognition. Like when he did that, nobody knew who he was. I mean, I don't know how many of you remember watching that as it happened. I remember watching like, who is this guy, right? You know, this was the thing that really got him out there. So that's an example of it. We don't have time to do the other one I was going to do, but I'm going to suggest you read it at some point. It's in your folder. I included the story by Matt de la Peña, who's this is like all Kathy's heroes become part of what we do here. Matt de la Peña is a young adult author, and he has a really lovely thing in there about how his story as somebody who grew up. Nobody in his family had gone to college. You know, he grew up a child of Mexican immigrants, and how like he never read, he never did any of that, and sort of the story of how he went from that to becoming a young adult author. So his story of self then becomes this other story about how people can find their dream and make their dream. And it's like for English teachers, it's really nice because he's a great young adult author and now children's author who won the Newbery Award last year. Okay, let's take a little break. Make sure we come back at 10:30, and then we're going to put this actually into, how do we put this into action? And we're going to be writing some stories and sharing some stories and trying to identify values together. Okay, restrooms down there, right there, some snacks over there, Starbucks downstairs. Yeah. And for people who don't want to do elevators all the time, there is a little staircase right here to the, if you go straight across here, that takes you down. And yeah, we'll start back in 10 minutes. So make sure you're back in 10 minutes.
Like a bag of snacks.
A bag of what?
Like a bag of snacks. I don't eat all your snacks.
We got snacks here. You don't like my snacks?
No, I love your snacks. That's the problem. Because I will eat them all.
You can eat as many snacks as you want. Oh. I saved some at home, so these don't have to for about 3 days.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm due October 25th. So,
that's so fun.
I prefer being over my due date, but if it shows up on Halloween, I would not get sent.
Oh, that's fun.
So talking to Ida though. So Ida's meeting too in August, right?
Mm-hmm. Hey Darcy, we started talking about social media class. We actually have a social media class.
So she loves cabinets.
Our teacher of it.
Yeah. And so she's really to dress up. So like, okay, cool. Like this is getting fun. Like, cause we dress up, you know.
Right.
So
Yeah.
she's not dressing up in or whatever. Because I made her like literally have a 10 minutes where I'm done.
Yes.
I'm gonna probably be the kid again.
Yeah.
17-week curriculum.
What
this looks like. That's a huge piece. Yeah, getting into the common sense.
I'm excited.
Yeah, and actually, like, there's so many things I didn't say. When I've had one schools that were really blessed in that regard, but like I thought this time. But then also that I'm partnering with creative writing teachers. And he's writing seminar on writing seminar too. And then we're going to flip this semester. So we're going to have a common log for kids. If they have him one semester, they're posting their creative writing. If they have me, they're posting their translation stuff. And someone they just see the public. I want to get I want to get mine from like social media for appropriate materials to be retweeting or posting about not just certain ways to sort of hearing but like like what's valuable in our work. So what are articles and what are pieces that actually sort of a message.
brand to start
what do you
different
like, you know, play dog,
actually working on a project together.
No. Everyone's like, oh, that was like she worked together. It's like she's trying to change that narrative around what it is at school. Sit for 20 minutes and literally be the words for something else. If I change something, they now
At some point, she said something.
Trump's Democrats. Like, I mean, you know, one wrong sign and she changed somebody's narrative, literally. And people don't understand that. They think that how difficult can it be? You know, like with like taking oral and without visual, at the same time that I'm taking it oral and putting out visual. Or a child that used to walk through the walls and she got distracted. So, you know, it's like, well, it doesn't cross the nation. So like she learned that that was her second language. She could talk about students or guys. Yes. Or birthdays.
But I have a special
that narrative website is different and so very and it's regional, literally regional by area and who's teaching you it and where they're
and so for my end of the
but that's where I'm
reflection,
thinking
like,
social media comes in
about these things. And so I put that I attended your workshop, your presentation.
You know, like when
so
she's
I don't know if I
signed
ever
for
explained to you
electromagnetic classes, like she was here to Rochester. That's where the international she's like literally working grabbing classes.
Yeah, if I could. That way. And I thought in talking, so everything I wrote about in my reflection
so it's interesting to hear what that looks like, and so
I really kind of gave me some help.
Are
but I was talking to my friend about it, and she does a one column rubric, with the blank column on each side, and she writes what is not proficient for what was excel.
You might end up at boss because they don't, you know, like
so that was cool.
And actually, I would do the
around.
We just put a microphone on our stage.
Great.
On our social media.
So I haven't read that one yet either, but it's on there. And so I kind of just announced that things.
Okay, we're gonna let out period 2.
The opportunities I've had to think about rubrics.
We're gonna let out period 2 early. We're just gonna put a microphone on there. You can go, and they were like, what do you need to look at?
Yes.
Our scheme, and then we also let them have.
And I've been trying to do these things. I do a smaller list of people that I've mentored so that you can it's at their level, but like we're still getting this in.
Did you walk out about testing?
No, about trauma. It was specifically about that and where they come from. Kids that are, you know, cross dressers in our school. Kids that wear headscarves.
What I'm wondering is like
Kids
if I
that
said
are
okay,
died in the
I want you to
Republicans and how do they live next to
words. Put
Yeah,
that down and
no.
figure out what it means. Like, how do you use
I
it?
think through social
This is
media,
your like your
that
thought
message
section,
is whatever. Like it's not just.
so it's not stupid organized, but I also want like.
And I think that's what a lot of the
Section.
blog is.
So I'm trying to think about like how can my students have conversation all in one place and be on the girls like that through the semester. The more kids in our school next year, so like our school too. It's like
Right. Because the problem is they teach them that's the problem. We're just going to pretend it doesn't exist. Well, and then it's well, now it becomes something about, you know, and now we can have retreats, you know, so now, like, as with social media and art, we're truly with our kids, so separated in the screenshot is or
yeah.
It's soft notes. Automatically, you know what I'm saying? But our kids really soft notes, they're not. It's not.
That was really, but I don't.
And they know, like,
So the article,
this,
what I'd like you to do
right.
is how you deny, so the kids can just.
We do have good laughs, well, like our kids.
So it would still be a hard copy, it would be on the Google Classroom. I was wondering, the minute you said like, putting the feedback together, my thoughts went right to Google Classroom, because I used it once this year.
Yeah, our motto is
last
you're
year.
the king of your own domain.
In the classroom, a lot of the time, which is
that's the wrong. It's like, you know, my mom's having a really uncomfortable call, and I go, you're in a meeting, and your mom never answers, it's uncomfortable, and they're like, well, yeah, you're in a meeting. So that means you don't answer the call, but it's your mom can leave a message, and it is really hard, that is the call.
Very cool.
Yeah, well, and I always say, I said, well, let me answer, here, let me take it, I'll answer and let them know, I'll be your assistant, let them know you're not. Well, yeah, you're not extra. Let's have the phone here, and I'll see your house. And they're just like, hey, it's okay. Right.
You're supposed to be about it.
Yeah.
Why are you answering?
Yeah. Nice to see you.
My user was not working. I'm sorry? My user was
I did? Okay.
So what's the Windows? Sorry.
Do you know that I almost got lost?
I'll just tell you that
Maybe that's what it is. All right, so let me show
you know,
you.
habit, especially when I go to different places like this.
I'm trying to be wireless secure.
Yeah. Did you bring your lunch or are you going out?
Oh, this one. I'm sorry, I didn't see.
I brought my lunch,
That's
but
not even.
yeah, you can sit outside or something.
On the other side there.
Exactly. Well, we have actually, what did you say? We're not working industrial schools. So our kids have like auto boxes showing on their iPads. Yeah. And
No, I wasn't in at all. I didn't charge it, so I figured she was talking to the person.
I want to start like,
Oh, I should ask what people have trouble getting out.
I'm like, I just do my diet really for 4 years. The whole time they're there, they check in and get the back.
All right, as we get started, we have one person who's having trouble getting on Wi-Fi. Is
Oh, but
anybody
it's,
else?
I should not be used as a guinea pig. I usually, like, she was like, well, click on the guest. Like,
Okay.
But did you get lemons?
Don't
I didn't.
declare it a problem until I had about 10 minutes to struggle with it.
Okay.
The rest of you might pop right on.
Thank you. I'll go environmental since we're talking about sustainable. All right. So we're going to start this next part by actually trying to do some of the story of self story of us story of now. And, you know, this just repeats some of the stuff that we said. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I want you to start by doing a little writing, and you're going to share this writing, or at least you're going to talk from it. So for about 10 minutes, write a story of no more than a paragraph, so it may take you less than that, of a great teaching moment. What happened? Why was it a great moment? And then think about what are the value words or the implications of value that you hear in the story. Okay, does that make sense? So you're going to be in small group sharing, so make sure you share a story write a story that you're willing to share with other people. So a great moment in teaching. about a minute to reach a stopping point. And find a place to pause. Okay, what I want you to do then is to get in groups. Get in groups of 3 and 2 groups of 4, 1 group of 3. You can, we have like little places you can gather here. You can go out in the hall, whatever. And I want you to get with people you don't know. Break up the California people. Like, get with some people you don't. Break up the Lansing people. Right?
We have a gang sign and everything.
I was going to say what
I was getting us what's your gang sign? What's your teacher sign?
Your L.
Is it A?
You gotta do it the other way. There you go.
Well, that's
Plus-
LA.
Oh, no, like A, like you grade, because it's a teacher gang sign. I tried.
Okay. Anyway, we'll get in groups of 3 and 4. And then share your stories, talk your story, or read your story, whatever you want to do. But do that, kind of quickly. We don't want to spend like 2 hours on this. So just tell a little bit about your story. And then together, just think about like, what are the themes you notice? What are the values? Are there key terms? Right, especially those first 3. Like, think about those. And then what I'm going to ask you to do is I'll give you each group a sticky pad, and I want you to write on it what are some of the values and themes and keywords that came up when you look across those. Because obviously what we're trying to do is, through the story of us, try to figure out what are the values we share that we would want to make sure are part of our advocacy as we go forth. Okay? So mingle, go. I'm going to give you about 10 minutes for this whole thing, maybe 15. 15.
And go.
Okay. Oh, yeah. You want to say on that? Okay.
Yes, I'm following. Where are we going? Geneva, where are you going? I'm just going to follow you.
Okay,
let's go over
You have
here.
a nice view of the fountain. Oh, never mind. We weren't fast enough.
Oh.
Musical chairs.
All right.
Andy, you're nice to meet you.
Hi, nice to meet you.
I don't want to lose your time. I wanted to get so much.
My other California people are
Here's a marker for you. So after you tell your story, you need it. First tell your story. You don't have to worry about it.
It was more a great semester teaching moment. This culminated in a school moment. I had a challenging student called Scott. And my daily format is always writing focused. And every couple of weeks, usually right around the middle period, just because you don't think about it, we just do a breakdown. For 7 minutes, you just have to write.
Do the best you can
just
do.
write. That looks like I don't need to tell you what it looked like. So the first time we did it, it was just calmly silent. I had nothing to say, and my response consistently was, write that, write that, write that, write that. I don't have anything to write that. And so pretty soon, Fred Jones, he stopped complaining because I was already hearing my broken record. But he also realized he had something to write, and he was angry that I didn't like where he was, so he was so miserable. And I thought about his next two parents, his mother called him double blessed. He's dyslexic, and of course highly gifted. So, and I was very blessed with her. So we moved through our semester, and I noticed the complete NFL football game. Became there a good breakdown. Thank God. And he had something to say, and trial. I just let him issue this. Of course, I always tell him we overshare. This is something I personally look like it without. Fast forward to the he turned in the process of course his
The only person that advocates for a child. So I said, for me, I just teach skills like attacking each one of the teachers when they're not teaching skills and they don't apply that to her. And not only that, I haven't seen one as a struggle struggling with as a first class. Before the project do, I kind of put it as a stand there. I don't need to date and say it's that color. And I said, I'm not sitting here. Go for it, sweetie. Knock yourself off. Good. So she says, oh, yes, and they don't even take that was like the I guess start from that's it. And she but that's so hard for teachers. We're not programmed to go. Yeah, you know I got it. I just went, you can answer it, I'm already and I just went, you're feeling with your child. Yeah, I was jotting things down. But yeah, it was like, we're looking for these values. That's what I said. We're golden, we're done. Through us, my time here is done. All of them, but I'm already anticipating. Yours was so good. This place that like, right. So earlier this year, I had something classes with that first thing was like that. No. This is what happens. We'll do Kelly Elder's article. Like yeah, it's fine. And so we did an article about residents, like, no, please, you're on the page, should they change the name, and then why are people feel that they should or should not? Yeah, make the huge. And so it's very
It's the beginning of the story.
So
much depends upon the revenue of Carol.
I know it's a great article.
So I went to
And I'm
in Carl's
really
way,
community in the classroom.
one of the greatest poems of the 21st century. College, every college professor. I have a variety of
Wait for me to see
fact,
interactions with my and so I have great kids and I knew I had great kids but strong and so I have 4.
Wow, I think that's
20 kids. So that's like 20 still.
No worries, don't worry about it. I had one of 24.
I mean, you can absolutely.
I do that in class a lot of years. I don't always use.
Right. Something's really easy right now, and it's hard. It's all over.
It's easy to figure it out.
And we'll come back to this.
Because
I really feel good about this.
Yeah, the energy isn't good.
Yeah, so like really big community. Like it's awesome, guys. So I started doing active listening. So like how do you listen to understand people? Like if you can't have a conversation, like if you're saying something I think something else, we're gonna disagree, but I'm fighting. Right. So like how and then how can I tell you that I'm listening to understand what you're saying?
Typically, I want to get involved with you.
No, it's not my fault.
And then we did like conflict resolution. So like if you're angry or something, you say you say this and then
This wasn't mine. I thought I turned mine off.
when I hear this instead of like attacking someone else.
And it drives
And
me
then also
crazy.
do like so like when I
We
have
program the students so
figure out
efficient
that and so we're done
that
this
they
whole
do
thing.
what
So
I'm
it was one of my favorite things.
They are physically.
It sounds like you're angry about it.
And I used to think it
You know,
was
whatever.
a joke.
Yeah, this is really silly, but when we
Now I
go
realize
to
it's
seminars,
an
it's not
actual
that
thing. They actually are really
sounds like
upset.
you're really angry about when it's
Many of them are really upset.
like, can you tell me why? Because I don't understand.
For 24
And they can
hours.
help you. Some of those kids came back, and they were saying,
And I still don't tell. Sometimes I go a whole year. And
you know, I'm like,
A
oh my
sentence
God.
starter, yeah.
That's awesome.
Look into council in schools. Council in schools, it's basically,
I go on there.
no, it's SIL. Oh, now you're CIL. It's council in schools, and it's the idea of telling your story in circle, and it's a way to learn. It's based on the Native American premise. So you use talking pieces, and I'm a facilitator of it, and I use it a lot in my classroom. And it's the idea of an active listener, so versus being an active talker.
Yeah.
So what that looks like, and we have talking pieces, and we have sentence starters. We do it around poetry, and it's really effective. So council in schools is
has a whole website, cis.org, and it's amazing.
I'm going to just read one of my favorite teachers.
That's the whole story.
And then the light in their eyes changes, and they dismiss it. That light in their eyes, it produces a high energy that I don't get into their eyes. It's the acknowledgement of the new idea of communications in their mind, and the dismissal is their need to be left alone to pursue it. In this year of being away from day-to-day teaching, it is a moment of experience. And that I do not want to be all things to all people. It's not about religion.
It's that whole idea they don't think they can create knowledge. They can teach or create knowledge.
Yeah, I can hear that.
That's what true thinkers do.
Yeah, and definitely the thing of leaders and facilitating versus
You said
teaching.
quality, bringing them to that learning quality because we monkey train and technique throw questions at them to really intellectually see.
Sometimes that's frustrating. We ask them questions because we want a certain answer. We ask them right answers.
Well, it just got to
You don't answer the answer.
Facilitating versus effectively definitely. I think also
Instead of saying,
it sounds like a light bulb moment, I call it, kind of that sign language it would be a this happened. That light bulb moment of I get this.
For kids.
Yeah, and I can actually share that information. You know how you said they shared what they learned out. My student told his mother the actual teacher what you think isn't happening. So you guys think 5 minutes is enough to pursuit other. Yeah. Yeah. If there's not a spell check on those things,
Maybe.
Then you have
Okay, I'll give you some. Okay, 7 more minutes.
I tried to have it before. The rest of the time, I just want to hit him.
But I always tell my kids, I'm like, that's a good thing. I like you.
That means that you're making me.
That's right.
It means you're making me a better teacher. Okay, so yeah, definitely. It sounds like in all of our stories, this relationship. I wonder also if it's not being done.
I think that the best in a relationship is
It's you. For your sitting? Oh, I can take it up.
That's Janet.
Yeah.
We're just gonna.
I don't know how to like that.
There.
Silent. It's that magical note. Silent.
Hi.
Okay, so
I'm Kathy. Hi.
when we
Good to see you. I'm glad you made it. Good.
value,
whereas like independence.
So yeah, I think so. Oh, but you'll get the. I think also STEAM is student as a teacher. Do you know that that kind of idea that they time you where we're going?
And they teach each other.
Yeah.
I'm gonna throw when today. Set up your group and you can kind of maybe like do a couple minutes summary of what you're doing. That.
Yes, then. In the fire. Part of the chair is on your part. Yeah. Your students, we need graphics.
Do you need 2 colors?
No, I think we're okay. But thank you for that invitation.
There are
We might
many
need stickers.
There are many markers. Help yourself to any
Yes.
equipment that you need.
I think relationship, you need like underlying relationship and then like tag it with else how they help.
So when you say tag it, do you want like
To make a connection, maybe make a, yeah.
It's almost like a springboard.
Yeah, well, I just think and it comes around to us, I think, that kind of concept.
You teach a food, right?
I do.
And
This year. He didn't tell Ed. He was in the.
yeah, well, my kid, like, that's what I meant by their teacher. Yeah, this student advocating for their right to have a voice, their right to do student advocacy for their own ability.
So,
Student advocacy for their arts.
do you mind if I say advocacy for voice and choice? But
Sure.
it's students.
Totally.
Yeah.
Okay,
So, no point.
this little gal, and she's a special ed program. But she makes sense of March achievements.
The kids actually get it.
So she had a very nice.
I don't know. I mean, kids get the heck of it. They will drink our plate and give you a place down the way. Do you know what I'm saying? They will buy whatever.
We meet people for all kinds of reasons.
They will take what we give them.
Well, I'm excited that you're here, and
we bring.
So I go, all right.
we'll get you caught up.
But if we
said, go ahead and.
Yes, come on over, these women.
like, I teach from wax for dinner.
Ben made me a little bit late.
Hi, Ben.
And I said, he could join your group, and you could kind of tell him where you are.
Welcome. I think that could even be your sitting
versus not get it.
Hi, I'm Darcy.
Well, yeah, I think
Nice to meet you. Are you local, Ben, or are you?
So 3 minutes.
Okay, I'm from Los Angeles.
Oh,
Yeah, so that doesn't
I
make
see.
much. Yeah.
I'm from Michigan.
Up north, north. Honestly, it was like, are you 2 hours ahead or 3? I had to get out my phone and figure that out. My brother's in Madison, Wisconsin, so it's always like a little bit. My older daughter lives in DC, so I'm always living in time zones. And my youngest is in Germany right now, so I live in a constant time zone. Yeah.
Your math skills are good.
Yeah, math skills are really good. And then she's living in Croatia from her daughter being in Croatia for 4 months. And she's signing, she's an interpreter, a sign language interpreter. And there's a deaf student living abroad, so they just went going out to interpreter. So she just needed to show the rubneck. She's done it once before.
You know, there.
Yeah. So I live in time zones.
Just the people don't accept.
So how we've got you.
We're good. So we were just telling each other an amazing moments of teaching time and then finding our commonality.
She knows.
But the whole thing so far is
And then,
so we like
right, so at least you let
we share. So it's each other.
and then your points are quizzes.
Okay.
So I guess what I'm wondering from you is, do any of these bullets resonate?
Anyway,
Notice how longer my minutes are getting. It's been like 2 minutes since I said 3 minutes, and now I'm saying 2
Puts you in the
minutes.
spotlight.
All
My
of
dad's not there.
There, good answer. Good answer. What do you teach?
I teach English,
we're supposed to.
but right now I teach, so I've always taught ESL. And then I teach something called flexible scheduling.
Okay.
And it's history and English interdisciplinary programs.
Yeah.
We have
No, you go ahead.
2 hours a day, every day for 4 years. So that's
Awesome.
9 to 12 grades.
Oh my God, what an experience.
Yeah.
We keep our advisory kids from 9 to 12. And it was, let me tell you,
I heard themes.
it's difficult letting them fly, launching them. And so I love that you're actually, and you're
I'm just
teaching while I was in advisory. It looks a little different.
Like, does it throw our value statements up on the wall?
Yeah, we're good.
You're good?
And is that your first year doing this?
It's
Or?
my second year with
Well,
Okay.
6 or
she
7.
facilitated, or
And I
is
taught English here.
Regular English, we call
Yeah,
it, right?
exactly.
Good old read a note, yeah. I teach that as well, so.
Yes.
which is
But
kind
that
of like
feeling
what you did
of,
too, because
you're gonna love, I loved being with my kids. In fact, they took I had to use my concentrate for advisories this past year, and I was super like, And maybe that's a good thing because, like, I didn't want a whole new set of ninth graders because I just graduated my seniors, and it was like when I texted all my kids because we don't have a minor group, and I'm like, I don't have advisory. They're like, ha ha ha, we broke you. You don't get anybody. So it's you can break your yeah. I said, yeah, I need to recover. So it's quite fun.
So, and your flex period, is it ELs integrated?
No, they have nothing to do with
No, that's
it's not.
Okay, 30 seconds.
Yeah, so that's definitely a learning. For so the scaffolding is different. Yeah, for you.
ESL work.
Yeah, you have so much more assumption of knowledge in your
Intersectionality with ESL work.
do you are you really clear in your English and then your history, or do you?
Okay, so we'll just go themes, housekeeping.
I'm a lot better in the English side of things.
Right. So like we.
Yeah, we have English teachers and social studies teachers in the program.
Okay.
We teach
all one.
Okay, you teach. Okay, that's
all one.
so. I taught in a middle school for a small time where we small time for years, where they blocked in court. So you took your kids 6, 7, 8. And I double blocked English and then history was a single block. So I had them for English every day. And every other day I had to say things for history. So it's kind of like what you're doing, but it's supported our English and I cut down to knowledge. So you really supported their English.
Physical therapy is the best.
And then I also taught them history, and I really am not a history teacher. I do so much English. Like, what's the story? What's the story of?
You put a bunch of teachers together and you give them time to talk.
And
it's always
Ron's never going to be on time, just so you know.
No, keep going. No break. You got to get going.
Early today. By our clock. That's over here.
We're like an hour off.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
We did it.
Keep going, Ron. Keep going. Finish your theme so we can do this.
I think we're good.
We're good. Throw it up over here.
Throw it up over here. Everybody's gonna
put them up over here.
Oh, so we need to move. Ben's like, great, I just got here.
You have time? Yeah, we're going to start, but you're going to go anyway.
Thanks.
And now you need to draw pictures. Yeah, now you are. No, I'm just a little.
Mandy, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Run to the bathroom or no? You can say no, I'm okay.
If you're okay.
Yeah.
Okay. If you're okay, just wait a few minutes. Okay?
Sure, that's fabulous.
Okay. We are back, right?
Sure.
Ben has joined us. We're going to give him a chance in a little bit to introduce himself and everybody introduced, but Ben has joined us. Welcome, Ben.
Hi, Ben.
Let's, Ben, grab a seat. You can be here.
The Three Boy Club.
It's a little,
It's great.
table.
Good.
Put your name on. Okay, so here's the first question I have for you. What, it's a process question. How did hearing other people's stories, like moving from the story of self to story of us, what happened process-wise when you heard other stories and got to think with other people about stuff? Yeah, just jump right in.
I'm a little ADHD, but which is, and I say that just because this morning, as we're going around and sort of telling short stories about what we're thinking about doing, and it got to me, I was like, my mind has changed about 1, 2, 3, 4. However many people went before me, I was like, oh, that's a good idea, or oh, well, that's a good idea, and it was kind of like that, where we were telling each other stories, and I've got the story, it's written here, but I'm like, but I should tell them about this, or we could talk about that, and it's, you know, it was inspiring.
Inspiring, okay, cool. To be able to hear other teachers' stories. What else happened in that movement from story of self to story of us?
It confirmed what we do works.
Okay.
Like, if my story matched a peer's story, it was like, oh, okay, so like we're doing something here.
Even if it wasn't the same story,
right, but
there's something underlying it.
Yeah, it just felt like, I don't know, I feel like we don't get enough affirmation of what we do is successful.
Yeah.
So I think that was it.
Yeah. And that you share these things about what makes something successful, right?
Yeah.
Did that happen in most groups? There was a sharing of, oh yeah, I do that too. I do it in this way. We could name it this. Yeah. What about the naming? Was that hard to like go from these are the stories to like these are the values or themes, or was that hard, or was that like
No. In our group, it was self-evident. It was
self-evident? Yeah.
I was bossy pants and just started writing it down. What our values are.
Yeah, but we're like, yes, good. We affirm.
So I would have done the same thing, but I would have dressed and it would have been awkward.
So, here's some things that, in case you can't see from there. Themes, values, key terms. Coaching. Like, let's look across these and see what we see. Coaching, facilitating, empowerment, connecting, relinquishing control, caring about students as people. Does that resonate with people? Are those values that we're sharing?
It's the same one. The second one says the same thing.
Yeah. Second one, facilitating versus instructing, with a little arrow saying they don't need us. Pursuit of light bulb, aha, get it moments. Investment in relationships to promote independence. Student is teacher, teacher, student. Very Paulo Freire. Advocacy for voice and choice. And this one you won't be able to inspire. It's got the values that like trust, coaching, research-informed best practices. I'm going to read the X's through later. Inspiration, the magic of NWP, empowerment, teachers and students, engagement, real reading, real writing, identity, sprouting and growing, with X's through wilting, or our students can't do that, teachers beaten down and testing to death. Okay, we look across these. What do you think of the values that we're sharing as teachers who are in the classroom, like who are right in the midst of it, knowing what's going on? What do you think are the biggest values that we're sharing?
There's definitely a theme that students come first. Their investment in what they're doing, their trust in their thinking, that is the student guiding, like the student is teacher, the student kind of guiding direction.
Yeah. Yeah. So the importance of students as like generators of knowledge, of teaching others, of like trusting their knowledge base as opposed to like being quashed down or told what to, right. Okay, that seems a theme that went across them all. What else?
I think it's sort of interesting that NWP is all about teachers at the center so that we can go back to our classrooms and put students at the center.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the, model it here. What does it mean when the learners are at the center?
Yeah.
It teaches us, it puts us in the guise of being the student and how, and once you realize, oh, I like learning this way, it becomes really evident that your students will too.
So learner-centered classrooms, right? That seems a theme. And modeling by teachers, right? To learn how to do that. What else seems like a theme that kind of grows across us? That's a value that we hold about education.
Writing.
Yeah, real writing, that came out, right? Real writing, real reading, those kinds of things.
Empowerment.
Empowerment.
The ability to make your own decisions. You don't have to wait for a program to teach you how to teach something. You don't have to wait for an administrator to tell you what to teach you how to teach. Having the knowledge and empowering yourself to make decisions.
So you're talking about teacher empowerment, but also it seems like student empowerment, right? Like that there are these connections you guys are making about how people actually learn, and that's what should be happening in schools, right? That's like a cool connection I think you guys have made across this.
Maybe a connection to this that we didn't actually talk about, so I'm in agreement on what I'm hearing from you now, is that there's this rejection of the standardized test, but not a rejection of assessment, but rather the assessment is the teacher as learner.
Yeah.
Of the students, and then the students being learners of their own, assessors of their own learning.
Yeah.
We need to bring assessment into it.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Okay, hold those thoughts because those are really good. Okay, here's what I want us to think about now, just for a minute. And we don't have to answer these questions right now, but think about these. What's important is how does that story of self go into a story of us? And this is the story of now part. Where does this lead us? How might these stories and the values that underlie in them help someone understand a different story of teaching? right? Think of the difference of just telling a story to somebody about what happened in teaching. You know, you're on the airplane and somebody asks you that question. Oh, you're a teacher. Oh, right? Versus what we've just talked about, the power of these values that underlie all of our stories. And how can we go public? So, you know, just think for a minute about, you know, with whom should we be sharing these kinds of stories? This kind of group thing, these kind of values. What parts of those stories would resonate with audiences? And we're going to learn more about how to do that this afternoon, but think about that. What specifics would be convincing? How can we consider and account for the relationships between our stories and others that are more prevalent or dominant? Right? The stories that you guys just were telling and the values that are around those, that's not the same thing as that popular story of education that we started with this morning. You know, so how can we make sense of that? And what genres would work best to share these things with others? These are things that we're going to keep considering through the workshop as you think about your issue and how you're going to do a story of now. And, you know, my little line about this, the more we talk to others, more our stories become part of a new public narrative. And that's what we're trying to establish, a new public narrative about teaching and learning. I want to share with you an example. You know, apologies again to people like Aaron, who's a returning fellow, has heard this a million times. But so the very first time I did some of this work, I taught a course at Eastern. And Beth Sham, who's a teacher in this area, took that course. And Beth was trying to decide whether to stay in teaching at that moment. She was one of those people you're talking about, like, I've kind of had it. You know, I don't want to stay. And so she took this advocacy course, you know, the semester-long version of this, which goes way more into depth. And she wanted to leave for all the kinds of reasons you guys are talking about. You know, she was watching her school change. She was watching the emphasis on standardized tests, on standardized curriculum, not being allowed to do the things that we've just talked about we know are the best. And so that was her story of self. Her story of us, she started talking to a lot of teachers, and she saw sort of this widespread angst among teachers who were struggling with the same decision. And so what she decided to do for her project is she wanted to find out from other people what keeps them going as a classroom teacher. Now, she started this in the negative. When she first came to me and said what she wanted to do to the project, she wanted to do about is why are teachers leaving the profession? And then we talked for a while, and what she then came to the conclusion of is, well, why do teachers stay? Right? Like, go back to that optimism thing we talked about in the beginning, right? Why do teachers stay? Because you can learn a lot from that, too. And so one of the projects she did for this class is they had to do 3 projects. She developed a website called Use Your Outside Voice, right? Go public, use your outside voice. And she created a video. You know, and it's not like a fabulous, 100% wonderful video, but it's like it was a really cool thing to get started. And it has gotten, I can't even tell you how many hits. I mean, I didn't check yesterday, but it got so many hits, and people were using it in schools, and people were, you know, like sort of imitating this work that she did, which makes me super happy. And what she did is she just put a message out to a bunch of teachers she knew and said, tell me why you stay in teaching. Send me a still photo with either, you know, like you've got a piece of paper in front of you or something on the board that tells your reasons for staying in teaching. And I'm going to play it for you. It's 5 minutes. cry almost every time I see it. It's good, isn't it? I mean, she did a really nice job with it. And I think that switch to emphasize the positive rather than negative made a big difference.
Yeah.
Right? This would be a very different one if it was why teachers leave. Right?
It's all problems and not solutions.
Right.
If
Right.
you start with the solution.
Yeah. Yeah. And did you see in that, like, a lot of the values that we were talking about too? Like the story of us grows wider and wider. What did you see in that showed some of those other values? Yeah. Yeah, those aha moments with the kids. That's why you stay, because of those aha moments. What else?
The caring about what students are as people. That
Yeah.
they're actually
Yeah.
like vital to our very being.
Yep. Yeah. Isn't this so different from that narrative, the popular story we started out with, like teachers do it because the work hours are short and you get your summers off, right? This is like such a different narrative about education that isn't out there in the public eye so much. Really different from bad teacher, right? Really different
So
from...
we have to be our own PR.
Yeah,
Because
we have to be our own
The
PR.
PR that's out there isn't in our favor, and if
Yeah.
we're not going to do that for ourselves, then it's not. I mean, it has to be. It's better to get those positive images out.
Right. And that's what we're going to be learning. How do you do this in ways that are really strategic so it doesn't backfire on you, right? So Beth was a first look at that. Okay, so here's what I want you to do. I know people are like, I have so many issues, right? I don't want to pick one, but you have to pick one for this workshop. And it doesn't mean that's the only one you'll ever have in your life, right? But I want you to pick one. So I want you to start with this, to take 10 minutes and think, based on everything we've done already this morning, what's an issue of education that arises from or connects to your story of self, something that you're passionate about, something that keeps you up at night, something you want to help others understand, and then how does that story reflect a much larger reality among teachers in education? It can be broad right now, because that's what we're going to work on, is narrowing over the time, but it's basically this naming of what is the issue you want to work on for this afternoon and the next 2 days. So take about 10 minutes and write a little bit about it. Remember, it's an issue that you want others to understand differently, right? You want people to understand the teaching of reading differently. You want people to understand the teaching of writing differently. You want people to understand, testing differently. You want somebody to understand the arts different, that arts belong in education. Something like that. What is it that you want people to understand differently about education? Does that make sense? Is everybody with me on that? So take about 10 minutes to write, and then we're going to do something with that. About a minute more. 1 minute. Take a moment to find a place to pause, even if you're not all the way done. If you got to start on it, that's good. Okay, everybody found a place to pause? Okay, hold on to that for a minute. We're going to do something with it. Okay, so remember we talked a little while ago about the 4 S's, right? Smart, safe, savvy, and sustainable. We want to think about working in smart ways about this issue that you've identified. So I want you to take about another 5 minutes to do some thinking and writing about this. What do you know already about that issue? What do you still need to know to understand it better, right? And where might you go to gather more information about that? And I want to, briefly before you start writing that, I want to talk about a couple ways to think about this. Like if we identify what we know, we might know, well, I can know this kind of because this is what's happened in my class, or I know this because I read a report on this once, right? We know some things. But when we think about where else we could go, you might be thinking about, like, what are the places that have really good sound research base on what you're thinking and writing about? Remember, a really good place to start are things like with the National Council of Teachers of English, with the National Writing Project. There's stuff we know that are really good sources for this. And we can talk about those later if you want to talk more, if that's something that you need to think more about. But we also should be thinking about, what happens if you do a really strong teacher research project, like a classroom research project in your own classroom, right? What do you learn from that? And I want to direct you to, let's see if I can make this happen. For those of you, how many people are familiar with teacher research? Is that something like, yeah, I know what we're talking about here? Okay, classroom-based research. So there's this blog done by one of our teacher researchers named Lisa Eddy, who's also taken this thing a few times. And she has a blog called Citizen Teacher. And so just what she's done this summer, this woman is like unbelievable. She does a teacher research project every year. She has what she calls the archive in her basement, which is the archive of all the research she's done over the years into various topics. And one of the ways our teacher research group talks about this, which I love, is when an administrator says to them, well, research says blah, 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 blah. They say, well, according to my research, da-da-da. Because like these people have done heavy research into it. Oftentimes people say to you, well, research says, and you need to say to them, can I see the research study? Can I, what do you, right? Because people just use that, right? So you really want to get good research on this. But if you go onto her Citizen Teacher site and you look under the reading part, her teacher research question this year was what happens when she introduces independent reading into her classroom. And so what she's done in a series of blogs here, and she has them ordered chronologically, so you should start from the first one on it, move. She does, she shows you how she went through the teacher research process. It's so good because it talks about her own question, but it talks about, so here's when I, asked the students to write about this. Here's where I did reading and I read into what other people have said about it. Here's when I did this. And so she models for you a wonderful teacher research process. So I'm just going to show you that as a fabulous resource if you're not as familiar with teacher research and you want to know more about how to do it. Anyway, okay. How do I make this come back?
Present.
present, sorry. There we go. Thank you. Okay, so to think a little bit about what do you know about it right now, what do you still need to know, and how might you gather that information? What external places would you go to? What kind of your own classroom research would you draw upon, etc. So spend about 5 minutes just jotting some notes on that, and then we're going to get with a partner, somebody new that you haven't talked to yet. Get with a partner and share. So I'll tell you when 5 minutes is up. Maybe about a minute more on this. We're just getting starts. what I want you to do then is to get with a partner, just one other person, somebody you haven't talked to maybe yet today, and just share. This is where I am, this is what I'm thinking. And partner, your job is to offer some feedback. How do you think that's resonating? Is it working for you? Do you have suggestions? Do you have ideas? Do you have thoughts of where that person could gather more? So what you're really trying to do is name what your issue is and name what you can do to get smarter about it so you can really know. Okay, and then what we'll do after everybody comes back for that, we'll go around and hear everybody's issue as it is right now, and it might change a little bit by tomorrow, but we want you to try to keep getting more and more focused on this particular area. Okay, sound good? So we'll take about 10-ish minutes to do this. Don't be shy. We just find a partner, find somebody you haven't talked to so much, and get together and work on it. And I just checked Twitter, and I noticed people have started tweeting in this little group. That's a hashtag that we came up with, so feel free to tweet as we're going. Do we have an even? I think we have an even number, don't we?
I think with the addition of Ben, we became even.
Yeah.
Hi, you got me back to the
I know.
Do you have a Ben on here?
Thank you, Darcy. Is everybody finding somebody? We're going to go get another power cord this afternoon. At lunchtime.
Because I have
You're struggling in a safe space.
this idea, but then it always goes back to other weird stuff.
Can I unplug you from here?
Yes, unplug me.
Yes, there's
I don't know. So this is what I wrote, but I'm looking at two different things.
So she's going to get another hour.
I'm passionate about bringing arts, creativity, and writing in the classroom. I know that creativity is life innovation, which is necessary.
So everybody has a partner, yeah? Good. You, David.
Enlightenment, or for art and writer. It can actually be tool and then it's disturbing. Maybe that's my that lack of. It's not just my school struggling by having teachers, school district, all real
Yeah, and it also looks,
so then I'm writing but it's disrespect. But there's I think that there's a national culture of that. Okay, so let me get I have a teacher explain to me that narrative writing and regional reading is not recognized and pertinent in the classroom, and that we actually only focus on real world writing.
They know more than they're going to find a way.
She has an argument in English teacher. Yeah, and I'm gonna go ahead and another psychology
creates supporting other teachers in my life.
I'm gonna switch up. I'm gonna get some lunch. So she actually we showed how to figure it out how to transport she taught
whatever. Even when they're project,
so but then it's shifts what I call pictures of misconception that is misunderstanding standards, which are standards, not for standards. But it's perpetuated by the districts. There's bad interpretations at what point. But that's not my. This is a picture that has to be said. I think the real issue. This is a technology that there's this sort of national thing that arts are not important. They're always cut. If they're going to budget cut something, the arts go. And yeah, right. Obviously. I have a whole different system going on in DC right now, but for the most part, yeah. I mean, yes, my daughter's just arts is heartbreaking and horrifying. So if I take the screen off, are you guys still okay? You don't need the screen.
like thing of teachers actually sort of like a back panel teachers that sort of have their
and then, but it's just interesting, it's kind of like 50% or less. It benefits. I'm so glad.
So,
yeah, but how many of them are?
Yeah.
So just repeating what the and
Oh, well,
it actually might be better.
So because I have, yeah, because I know when I started
too.
And
a lot of just like, ooh, think about some stuff and then I can sit and chat with you.
So people love.
And I did write that down. Given my worst
Page 30. We've had a very active morning.
Yeah, nice.
Which is that
Where would I go? I kind of.
It's like
Right,
obviously.
So what are
Well, I think that on a small level, there's a change in the rhetoric. There's a, at my school right now.
I hope so.
Our team, we're very aware, but that it doesn't really bleed out into.
You're a high schooler,
We're a middle school.
So 6, 7, 8.
What do you think you're doing intentionally?
We're going to be
Part of it?
12. We're going to on different campuses. So there's like continuity.
But you will have a separate building for your little ones?
I'm 7, 8.
Yes.
Our building,
Yes.
we have a 5, 6 and a 7.
Oh, yeah, no, we have,
Which I think is a good idea for transition.
I know we have a middle school and a 6, 7, 8 guys in blocks, and 2,000 blocks. But our academy, this year we were 6th and 7th grade, 6th grade had 150. 7th grade had 100, like, there was 120, but we had 150. So that was small, then next year, they upped, they actually are.
So with the changes that you're aware of, that's
So on a small level, I feel like the proof is in the pudding. We know that we're doing a great job and we see results, and we're just going to keep plugging along and try and put on blinders to the naysayers.
Well, what's the project? So they're over here, forget about it. What are you going to do that's going to be called a project that's going to be?
Well, so I think
because you're already doing things and back.
I think that because the high school portion of it is it's one of those things where it's a constant job to make sure that they don't forget about it. It's a constant job because our district is
Right.
So, for example,
we talked to my parents and your child's going to the colors and cousin
our school board meetings are televised. They're like, and it's terrifying. People there's a lot of security. It's just terrifying. So, staying on
Which you need to go on by. And if it's not you, with surrounded by people, I'm not saying all the time.
So do you have people yeah, like our perspective, and we talked about this and so
I'm saying meetings, but I make myself go.
Well, the board meetings are it actually was once you were there. Once you were there, it was almost like once you were there, it was like okay, this is my job.
Well, also
but I think that our next steps are because the teachers, we all know but we're going to try and partner with parents for our programs because we've got some crazy tiger.
We have a friend.
So that's what we need a friend in camera.
Yeah, I mean, we need
you cut my art funding.
Right. I mean, like it needs to be like.
But if it's coming from parents, that actually should be a how the strategy was. Because if you're like, all right, here's
like our children, and then you have the parents talk and show up
you know, and that's, I mean, my whole, I just got my master's degree, and so I had to do an advocacy research project, and my whole academic research project.
I know our kids are teacher, we're one per grade, we have a seven, and utilize media, we just started three guys to retire. So God bless her, that she puts on this show, and she only gives her 5 years ago, and that's like that. With outreach, and it means she does a lot of she treats it like you're about to go see me, and she's or just having enough information. But like, she makes it like museum style with, I mean, we have like freaking resources, but she has the kids like be creative
about another minute or two.
So can you guys like end like what you're doing, but to have that or something like that? This last can you expand that like attorney expand? I know that you're doing great things. So what's right? They're just trying to tap on things to project that you like. Because we're talking how to get out. No, we're just spitballing ideas. No. Yeah, you can certainly be more. I just love what you're saying. You're already doing. That's great. So that's that's
so like I researched and then like figure out this and whatever. And we started.
And that's why we're here. We're here to make sure. Because I mean, same thing with my family. And tell me about your practice. I mean, it's mine specifically is that. Where's the population? There's a video. I'm sure you're okay. That he lives in my district. I have these kids in Dallas. I really try to report. You know what I mean? So in those kids, I got some yeah, every kid needs a document. It's never very nice and when we try to report, we're told that. And so it was tobacco. And now we're like, you're not wrong. But she just can't speak. But we could tell that it's something that's, at least all our different things. So this is very, very televised, but I because we have the business population. We're like in this idea constantly. It's that idea. It's that when I'm doing homes, how we use every kid. When I'm doing more we have in our school program. But that idea, like what happens. So my big project is trying to accomplish challenge days. It's not no. Okay, so we'll do that later. So they have a lot of resources, and the whole school has on a very small scale bring it in and have a challenge day, but really challenge day is about a cultural topic. Where every single child matters. And I do part of literacy details, but they very much connect, that empathy, which is how I was cringing when you were talking about that woman. Like, my God, like you read those short stories in class, and kids just have a free brain, like it's so much more out of it. And and I just look around, I just step over those. I try to understand where always comes from insecurity. Like I know that she's
How are we doing? How are we doing? Are people? Isn't it great? Like to shut these conversations right down. Do people need a few more minutes, or are we good to go? A few more minutes? 2 more minutes?
Did
Okay, 2 more minutes.
And I don't know when I get off the thing, it's like crazy. I dream festival, and I wanted to
We are part of
this is really
writing project at the
pretty much like it's like no, I want to be the district that this is what
I said that.
She's really close. She thought like when I first wrote this thing,
I was able to make everything convinced her just so fast, but it doesn't make any sense. Yeah, we did a little bit of this in the class today. This is just in more depth over time. Yeah. And so then what we did over there, those are the things that they did after they wrote their story stuff. And then they did off like what it is, values that we share that are so different from those values that came out in the first few slides about what's about education and how different that was. And so then what people are working on right now is trying to identify the definition.
I don't want to
And I don't think what are you thinking?
Right. So, and she's my data queen. So we got our like test scores back. She's the
I don't know that we'll get out like 14 minutes across the band. And we got one thing. But yeah, my
no, that's fine. But just think about what part of the system are you concerned about.
Very familiar. And my daughter was she's like, she said, one of the ceremonies one was fun.
Right.
Yes. I mean, like,
right. There was
reason.
All right, I am going to pull us together. I'm going to pull us together. Thank you. People don't listen to me. Yo, let's pull back together. Again, the joy of summer workshops is getting a chance to talk to people. I know that. But let's pull together for a minute. Huh?
It's a thing.
It is a thing. It's an important thing. That's why we give an hour for lunch, too.
Good.
So let's pull together. You can just stay where you're sitting. It doesn't matter. So what, are people starting to get issues?
Oh, we came in with issues.
Are people
Have
starting,
problems in a math book.
are people starting to come up with an issue that's like not a 10-minute discussion, but something you could just say, like, basically, here's my issue?
Yeah, no, we're not there.
Not there yet. That's okay. That's okay. Yeah?
Ron really helped me because